well. Let's find out what Scott Lucas thinks. Scott Lucas is Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute at the University College Dublin. Scott, you're very welcome to Talk TV this morning. How are you?
It's great to be here. It always makes my morning to talk to you good folks.
Thank you very much indeed. Just before we get into our discussion, I just want to play a clip for us all to look at and listen to in regard to what Donald Trump has been saying over the charges. He was photographed. He looked pretty defiant in that photograph, maybe angry, depending on how you want to look at it or interpret it necessarily, and also what he thought of the fact that he had been called to Georgia, his fourth indictment, 91 charges. Let's hear what he had to say.
I believe this is a very sad day for America. This should never happen. If you challenge an election, you should be able to challenge an election. I thought the election was a rigged election, a stolen election, and I should have every right to do that. As you know, you have many people that you've been watching over the years do the same thing, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Stacey Abrams or many others. When you have that great freedom to challenge, you have to be able to, otherwise you could have very dishonest elections. What has taken place here is a travesty of justice. We did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. And everybody knows it. I've never had such support. And that goes with the other ones, too. What they're doing is election interference. They're trying to interfere with an election. There's never been anything like it in our country before. This is their way of campaigning. And this is one instance, but you have three other instances. It's election interference. So I want to thank you for being here. We did nothing wrong at all, and we have every right, every single right, to challenge an election that we think is dishonest, that we think it's very dishonest. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you very soon. Thank you very much.
That was former President Donald Trump there saying that he believed the election in 2020 was dishonest. He says that he has done nothing wrong, and he called it a travesty of justice. Scott, what do you think? Do you agree with him?
Well, Peter, I think my starting point is what you probably know from Westminster, and that is it's not necessarily the facts that matter, it's who controls the narrative. And what you have here is an attempt by Trump to control the narrative, and even going to the point of repeating the knowingly false statements, and he knows they're false, saying that this was a rigged election, this was a stolen election, and having been accused not only at the Georgia level, but at the federal level of trying to overturn the 2020 election, saying, oh, no, it's people who are interfering in the election by accusing me, so playing the victim. So I think the first duty for you and I, or for you and me as journalists and as analysts, is to cut through the disinformation, to cut through the spin, stick with the facts of the legal case, because this is not just a question of one man, Donald Trump. This is a question of a man who happens to be named Trump, who's actually trying to take down the U.S. legal system and also the U.S. political system and democracy by putting himself beyond accountability.
That accountability, of course, depends on impartiality, and he would say this is a heavily Democratic county. There are about 1 million people in the county where he is being charged. There is a Democratic district attorney, a Democratic sheriff, and a Democratic judge. There's nothing wrong with that. That's democracy. That's how people vote. But he believes, and many of his supporters believe, that this particular indictment against him and 19 of his alleged co-conspirators is something that is at least in some way politically motivated.
Well, again, let's get back to the facts to try to cut through that. The first is that, as you note, is that the U.S. has a system where district attorneys are elected. So there are many Republican districts in the United States. I come from one where Democrats, or people who are registered Democrats, will have to stand trial. It's a system that we've had for many decades. But the fundamental of the legal system, as I'm sure you know, but hopefully the viewers will know as well, is that the legal system itself has a series of safeguards in terms of dealing with bias. So, for example, the district attorney, the judges, the prosecutors all have to observe the legal standards set by their professions. And if they don't observe those legal standards, doesn't matter if people elected them, they can be removed. But significantly and importantly, jurors are tested for bias as part of the pretrial phase. I think if you watch American TV, you'll see sort of this glamorized. But it is true that a juror will be asked, what do they know of the case before they come in? Do they have any pre-existing opinions? And if they do,
surely every juror will have some opinion on Donald Trump. I mean, the impartiality or lack of bias, and that is going to be pretty, whether it's the fairest jury that's ever existed, nonetheless, all of them will have some sort of opinion on Donald Trump. Almost everyone in the world has an opinion on Donald Trump in some way.
Which will make it important that in addition to the fact that the defense and the prosecution can both say, look, we don't want this person as a juror because they're biased, is that the judge also is able to strike jurors who, of course, will have heard of Donald Trump, but who will have walked in that courtroom thinking, oh, either he's innocent beyond all doubt or he's guilty beyond all doubt. Because again, a fundamental here is Trump is presumed innocent on all of these 4 indictments and these 91 felony charges until he is convicted. And that has to be maintained. But at the same time, you have to try to ensure that he is held accountable and not use the false excuse, oh, they're coming to get me.
What do you think is
one other thing to add? Yep.
Sorry to interrupt you, Scott. I just wonder what you think is likely to happen here in terms of the timescales and so on from your analysis, because if this drags on into the 2024 presidential election, the nominations, the conventions coming up and so on, surely that it actually plays into Donald Trump's hands in that he is by far and away the favourite to be the Republican candidate.
Yeah, first of all, the facts and then knocking back the talking point. Fani Willis, who's the district attorney in Georgia, says she wants to have the trial as early as October. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're looking early 2024. In the 3 other trials, here's your scorecard. January 2024 for the federal indictment over the attempt to overturn the 2020 election. I believe it's March, which is the classified documents case, illegally moving documents from the White House to Florida. And then it's the spring also for the interference in the 2016 election with the payoff to the porn star Stormy Daniels. So all 4 trials could be running during the Republican primaries. Now to knock back the talking point. Donald Trump's tactic is going to be, if you come after me, it just makes me stronger. Even as he plays the victim.
Well, we've seen the evidence for that, Scott. We've seen the polls go up every time he's indicted.
Peter, there's actually evidence which cuts the other way, although the Trump people won't point you to it. And the American media are getting led by the nose. Since the federal indictments at the start of the month, and since the Georgia indictments, in the first Republican contests, which are in Iowa and in New Hampshire next year, Trump has slipped. He slipped in Iowa from about the mid-50s to about 42, 43%. Now, that's still a lead over all his challengers. But here's the fundamental point. Trump is benefiting right now because he's blocking out the sun, and he's the only one that the media can find in the darkness. If you have the media actually covering the other Republican candidates, who just had a debate, I believe, in Wisconsin, if the media cover the issues, not just the legal issues, but the important political issues, whether it's women's rights, LGBT rights, economy, foreign policy, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if those other candidates get a look in, then you break that reinforcing cycle of Trump saying, I'm winning, media says Trump's winning, and people who are surveyed say, well, I guess Trump's winning.
Let me ask you just before you go about Prigozhin, because I know that you're a professor of international politics. We think he's dead. He may not be, but the likelihood is that he is. Where does this leave the Wagner group? Where does this leave President Putin, do you think, Scott?
Well, Occam's razor, simplest explanation is it's not just Prigozhin, but his military commander, his head of security were killed on that jet, which was probably brought down as part of an assassination. In terms of where it leaves the Wagner group, Vladimir Putin waited 2 months after the Wagner mutiny before he went after Prigozhin. Why did he wait 2 months? Because the Kremlin wanted to make sure that it took control of Wagner's activities, not just in Ukraine, but especially in Africa and the Middle East, where Wagner is used to control raw materials and very lucrative resources. So Wagner fighters, they'll now try to bring them into the fold under the Russian Defense Ministry, and they'll replace Prigozhin in terms of the logistics, in terms of, this mini empire that he was running, where everything goes directly to the Kremlin rather than through the mercenary group.
Scott, fascinating to talk to you this morning. Thanks for your time. That's Professor Scott Lucas there, who is Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin.